This is episode 3 of our Stephen King podcast, where we talk about books, fan theories, the overall Stephen King universe, Dark Tower, things like that. We are down a slut today due to the holidays, but you have
Just the two of sluts.
just just a pair of sluts. Hey Thomas, how are you today?
I am well, friend Jeremy. How are you?
Doing excellent, doing excellent. Um, so yeah, just like jumping in, I know we both finished The Stand. What did you think of the ending? Because I know the ending gets a lot of flack. Um, what did you think of it?
I mean, and I think this is something that Stephen King has done a couple times, at least in the few books that I've read, and it's been many years since I've read some of them. Probably the last most recent was It,
Mm,
where his ending, the denouement, the falling motion, like after the climax, is extended. Um,
mm,
I think that's because he tries to make his stories kind of closer to like real life so that they like hit in a more visceral way because they seem real. And stories don't just end.
mm,
Like the people in the stories keep on living. And I think that's something that's part of the horror is like you survive the story. So the way the stand ended with like, the culmination of what happens between the good and the evil between Abigail's people in Colorado and Flag's people in Vegas is what, a couple hundred pages, at least 100 from the actual like last page of the book. It's at least 100 pages. I'll have to look at
mm.
uh but
Yeah.
the ending is that whole process of Tom Cullen returning and finding Stu Redman and them returning. And I think it's great. I mean, there were parts of that ending that literally brought me to tears. And I'm not one to like respond too like viscerally, like emotionally to things, but I
Yeah.
had tears in my eyes at a couple parts. Maybe it's because I'm a sucker for Christmas and the snow, but and it's Christmas time now. It was just a few days ago.
Yeah.
Uh, but I really enjoyed it. I liked that the story continued, that there was still
Kept
hardship
going.
to face, that like
Yeah.
even though the goal has been achieved, like they're no longer worried about, literally being nuked to death by their
Mhm.
enemy or, caught or tortured or anything. But this world is still hard and it's not easy. And just simple logistics things that we all take for granted, like roads, like none of that's being cleaned anymore, and just moving from one place to another place is as horrifying as anything else in the world right now,
Yeah.
whether it be like an evil entity or the possibility of a building collapsing on you because no one's taken care of it in so long.
Yeah.
And I liked it. I thought it was well portrayed. I really liked their journey.
Yeah. That is a really good point because you don't see that a lot in books where, the bad guy gets decimated, he's basically wiped out, and then the story keeps on going. That is highly unusual. Um I can't really think of any other book that does that where it's like, the bad guy is defeated, everyone's fine, but then it keeps going. So that's a good
Lord of the
point.
Rings kind of does that actually, to kind of nod towards our missing slut, who's a big fan of Lord of the Rings, Christy. They, destroy the ring and Sauron's dealt with, and then the book keeps going, and it's one of my favorite parts of the book
Hmm.
too. Is like a little bit of their journey back, and then like what they return to.
Hmm.
Um, so I don't think it's done often, and most
Huh.
other fantasy novels I can think of, like the culmination happens, and then you might have 20 to 50 pages, left over.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but I like those extended endings.
Huh. Yeah,
I think there's a place for both of them. I don't think
yeah.
every novel or every book should have that, but I did enjoy this one.
Maybe like you said, maybe he did that as kind of like a nod towards um towards Lord of the Rings. And then speaking of
I didn't even
which,
think about
so
that, but it's literally he even speaks in
huh,
interviews how the whole book is a nod towards Lord of the Rings.
yeah. Another thing that I was gonna say is I'm not super familiar with Lord of the Rings, but apparently, so Frodo has the ring, and he needs to basically climb Mount Doom and throw it into the lava. And
Oh,
uh, in interviews, Stephen King literally said that Stu Redman is supposed to portray Frodo in The Stand. So we can confirm that without a doubt, there's obviously, we have our theory that Trash Can Man is Smeagol, but he literally said Stu Redman is supposed to be Frodo. Now, when Stu has his broken leg and he's crawling up out of like I guess like a ravine, would you say?
yeah, that's how I imagined it. Like it was a bridge going
Yeah.
over a ravine, and the bridge had
Hmm.
crashed, and it was sheer walls. Yeah,
Yeah. And he's kind of like using all of his power, using all of his might to scrape and crawl and get up this ravine. And then once he finally crests that edge, then he looks over and he sees the nuclear bomb going off that was brought by Trash Can Man. Do you feel like he did that on purpose as kind of like a parallel with Frodo making that perilous climb up Mount Doom, or way off here? What?
no, I think that's like right in line, and it's interesting because like if he's Frodo,
Mhm,
the it's different. It does diverge a little bit from Lord of the Rings because like he doesn't get to the end game. Like he's not there, which is why he survives. But where
mhm,
Frodo was actually like gets to Mount Doom, and even though it's Gollum and their tussle that causes the ring to fall,
mhm,
maybe it is more similar than I'm thinking of it because he's not there, and it is Trash Can Man who ultimately brings about that demise. Wow. As I speak, my whole like mindset toward has changed. That is very Frodo parallel because at first I was like, but he doesn't get there,
mhm,
but he still like makes that sacrifice and firmly believes he's going to die. There's no one coming around to save him.
mhm,
He knows that the mission that they were going on is probably a death mission. Um, and then that visceral like crawl using all of his strength as he's injured and fevered from infection to see the fruit of their labors that like oh crap like well they're all gone now.
mhm,
um yeah, I think that's a direct parallel. I think you're right.
mhm. And do you? I mean, I don't know too much about the end with Smeagol, but if if we assume that Trash Can Man is in fact Golem, uh, am I saying that right? Gollum?
Gollum.
Gollum. Okay.
I don't
If
know which
we
one's correct.
okay, if we assume that Trash Can Man is Gollum, would you say that Trash Can Man bringing the nuke right into the middle of the city and then basically sealing everyone's fate? Do you see another parallel with that and how the end of the end with Gollum?
Well, yeah, it's almost like the nuke is the ring, but like not necessarily specifically the nuke as like the is to like take upon evil is
Mhm,
the ring because like Randall Flagg offers like power to his lackeys. And so there's not necessarily like a direct like oh this one thing is the ring, but I think
mhm,
that power and then therefore that nuke at the end, which is like Trash Can Man's ability to find dangerous things, which is definitely like an aspect of the evil that he gives into by joining Randall
mhm,
Flagg. Yeah, I could see that as being a parallel to the ring and how the
mhm,
ring is always referred to as a weapon because it empowers the person that has it to like let the energy of Melkor, the evil god, like work through them or Sauron's energy.
mhm.
Um, Is that what you were thinking it was?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. But I don't know enough about Lord of the Rings to really make that parallel. That's why I'm always like, "Hey, do you think, there's a parallel here?" Because I don't know. I'm just like throwing stuff out there. Um I do think that at the end I saw a lot of parallels between um, you know, uh, how the ending kind of plays out, and then Jesus' last few days on Earth before he's killed by the Romans. Did you did you notice any of those parallels, or is that just me?
The like the Christ story parallels.
Yeah, yeah, like his
Oh, I mean, absolutely. With Glenn Bateman and what was the other gentleman's name? The other good guy who went with them, Larry.
oh, uh,
Um,
yeah, Larry Underwood, Glenn, and then who was the third one? Oh no. My God. Who is the
uh,
third guy?
uh, was it Ralph? Is that his
Was it?
name?
That might be it.
It was the country guy. I feel like it starts with an R.
Let me see. Hmm. Well, not super pertinent, but I I saw a lot of parallels because um when the soldiers approached Jesus and his followers in the garden at night, they just basically gave themselves up. I think one of the apostles, I want to say, pulled out a sword, cut off like a guard's ear, and then Jesus healed his ear.
Yeah,
Um,
Peter. He was the hothead of the apostle group.
yeah, and but beyond that, he was just like, "Oh, okay, this is what's gonna happen. We're not gonna fight you. I'm just gonna give up and go into your custody." And me personally, I saw parallels there where you've got, originally four people, but then it was just down to three. And they, obviously could have started attacking Flag's men, shooting them. I mean, did they have weapons on them? I mean, surely they did.
As in like did Glenn Bateman and Larry Underwood and Ralph,
Yeah,
if that's his name. I don't
maybe
know if they
they,
did. If they did, they surrendered them immediately. But I
yeah.
don't think they did because they were told to take nothing, and they made sure to abide by that.
Okay, okay. Yeah, because I remember Flag's men definitely had like machine guns, and they're like, "Oh, you're coming with us. You're going, directly to prison." Um, I was drawing parallels there because I was like, I mean, that felt like basically what happened in the garden where they're like, "Oh, okay, we give ourselves up. We're not gonna really put up a fight," and then um did you think maybe there was some parallels because I know when Jesus died, there it wasn't just him by himself. He was flanked by two other uh criminals, right? So there was a total of three people. Uh and obviously um at the end here there was three people again. And I almost wonder, so there was a thief, I want to say it was a thief that basically was dying next to Jesus, and he's like, "Oh, I was a bad person." And then Jesus basically says something to the effect of, "You'll still enter into my kingdom even though you were a bad person, or you committed crimes." And I almost wonder if that's supposed to draw a parallel with Larry Underwood. Because, obviously Larry Underwood had a checkered past, not the best person. But then at the end there, he kind of makes a reversal and gets on the right path. if you will. So then you have kind of like that character that gets redemption, who they were like a bad person originally, and then the sacrificing of the three of them. I don't know.
Yeah,
Do
and I
you?
feel like Larry is the one that had the most doubts of all of them too. So if there was somebody who needed a redemption at the end, who was still like, not fully committed or,
Mhm,
filled with doubt, that would be Larry. But yeah, that whole capturing and then like the execution scene is very similar to the Garden of Gethsemane and then the like cross. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and even like the opportunity that Harry and Glenn and Ralph, or whatever his name was, are trying to give to Lloyd to
mhm,
be like, this is so fucked up, but
mhm,
like
mhm.
you have a chance now. And he doesn't take it, and it makes me think of what was his name? It started with the P, the Roman.
Was it
uh
Pontius Pilate?
yeah,
Pontius
Pilate.
Pilate knew that what he was doing was wrong. He was like, I shouldn't be doing this, but he kind of gave in to the crowd. The crowd was cheering for the death of Jesus. And yeah, I wonder if, like you were saying, uh, Lloyd kind of takes the role of Pontius Pilate here, where he knows that shooting an innocent man is wrong, but he's just like, all right, well, I'm gonna do it anyway.
Yeah, he's been in for a mile this whole time, and doesn't see any way out of it. Of course, none of them like can foresee trash, on the horizon about to
Uh-huh.
nuke all of them.
Right,
Um,
right.
and one of the things I really like about stories like this, especially when concepts of good and evil are introduced, and concepts of faith to the point of a religious experience, is not that like faith empowers you to overcome, even though that is part of the concept. But
Mhm,
like their faith in the process and them doing what was asked of them by Mother Abigail and the power of good didn't mean that like right there at the last moment their chains broke and they got a sword of righteousness and they were able to take down their enemies. It was
mhm,
that their faith in believing that they were on the right path, type of cosmic domino effect almost, that
mhm.
would end in a good result. So none of them could have known about trash. And if you think about like what if they hadn't followed the rules and they hadn't approached like that?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So they went with guns. Okay, so they get gunned down. So there's no execution. So that there's somebody on watch. So that they see Trash Man coming. So they send somebody out and realize he has a
Yeah.
nuke and stop that problem right there, or at least get it away. And then you still have the core of the enemy left. They
Mhm.
the faith process, the process of winning is like trusting in the process of what is good. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that's I don't know if like the message is the right thing because I don't necessarily think that's the message that Stephen King was trying to get across, but that is the clever way that the universe makes things right and the divine typically interacts not in these huge miraculous ways, but in these small ways that move through people, good and bad, that
Mhm.
that end uh, in these resolutions. And I think
Mm.
it was very, very well done, and it held to that kind of spiritual experience approach that the two opposing sides were
Mhm.
like the framework they were built upon for the book was like that biblical epic story
Yeah.
sense, and you
Yeah.
don't necessarily get to come out unscathed. I've been reading The Magicians too lately, and one of the concepts of that series is that the hero is not the person who benefits. He's the person that sacrifices everything and doesn't get recognized, and loses it all so that others can move forward. And it's not this like beautiful glorified thing. It's dirty and gritty, and you don't like it. Being a
Mm.
hero is not a fun process, and I think that was apparent in this, that them doing the right thing, like they still died, but that's okay. Like that's what doing the right thing can lead to, is
Yeah.
sacrifice for a cause towards a
Yeah.
good that you're not going to see, and that's what makes it heroic.
Yeah.
You know, if a hero just does something to get the prize in the end, then like they didn't do something for a greater good. They did something for the prize at the end, even if that's not their motives. That's
Mhm.
kind of how like divine story works out, and I just really like how Stephen King did it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting because a lot of times when you're reading on internet forums, I think if you don't see the parallels between, the Bible and then the ending for The Stand, um, if you're not aware of that, it seemed like the ending really confused people. People were saying, "Well, why did they have to die? I don't understand." What that was so pointless. That was such a terrible ending. All these good guys died, and it was, and for what? What was the point of them dying at the end? So
And I'm sure
I
they see like, oh, every the problem was going to resolve
Mhm.
itself, but that's not necessarily the case.
Exactly. A lot of people online were like, "Well, Trash Can Man was going to bring the nuke in to, the middle of Vegas and detonate it no matter what. So why did Stephen King have all those people die? I don't understand. That's such a terrible ending, And I almost feel like if you miss those parallels and you kind of miss what he was doing there, I could see why you would get confused and you would
And
think,
it
oh,
wouldn't be
this,
a
yeah,
satisfactory story because you want your
yeah,
hero to come out with a flaming sword. That's badass when that happens, quite frankly.
right, right. So it's
You're like, why would Stephen King let them die? And people are like, why does God let avalanches happen? And why does
it,
God let tsunamis kill
yeah,
people? Why does Stephen
yeah.
King let this happen?
Yeah, that's pretty much that was a lot of people's response. Like if you look at online forums, a lot of people would be like, "This is one of the worst endings I've ever read. A bunch of the good guys die in the end, and then just some random nuke goes off. What's up with this ending?" I think they were almost expecting like, a Walking Dead style ending where it's like the forces of good take up like, M16s and they go, covert and break into Vegas and mow everyone down. But that's not what he was trying to write at all. And I guess that's what a lot of people were expecting.
It's interesting because I think there is a place for that kind of story. Like that is satisfying. Um, and people don't like to see their characters die. I do.
Mhm, mhm.
I like for stories to be visceral, and I
Yeah.
think Stephen King does too, and that's why he formed it this way. It'll be interesting as we read more books to kind of see how his endings differ and like which ones do get like the Rambo action where you do pull
Hmm.
through. Uh,
Hmm.
that's interesting. I guess after some thought, I would have expected most people to react that way, without having like read through like Reddit subreddits and stuff
Hmm.
discussing this. But yeah, I like it when stories don't do that because that's not often how it happens. I mean, if everything turns out good at the
Hmm.
end, what was the story for? Like what
Yeah.
like who changed? Like if you're just gonna like, go through some trials and at the end of it they're like, all right, you made it through, here's your M16, you got plot armor. Like that's not real to me or engaging. Not that I need all stories to be real, but I like it when the chaos of the world is a aspect of it, especially when it's a divine type of like analog story, like the stand is
Yeah.
to uh, all of its biblical references and Lord of the Rings references,
Hmm.
where you you as a person, like a character in a story, cannot account for everything, and if they do, the story doesn't ring true because it doesn't make sense. And
Hmm.
Stephen King's really good about broadening the horizon of his point of view. We've talked about this, I think, just you and I, how like Stephen King gives you perspective when he wants to show you something, especially when it's not part of where the action's happening. He gives you the perspective of somebody seeing what he wants the reader to
Hmm.
see. So, you'll get a random guy named Bob somewhere else who's like seeing something that's a beat in the story, and then Bob immediately dies. But we got to
Yeah.
see what Bob
Yeah.
saw. Whereas like in real life and in real stories, it's not always like enemy, henchman, they fight and that's it. No, they're
Mhm.
surrounded by people. They're surrounded by variables. And Trash Can Man, I think, is a great example of one of those variables. And it gives it this like ring of believableness to me,
Mhm.
that like the thing that ended the situation was this side character who was going through his own turmoil and insanity and was doing a horrible crazy thing that ended up being a power for good,
Mhm.
even though so much like horror was committed in that act of that bomb, because there's people there that were just roped up and passive participants in the darkness that was happening, but they're not evil people.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
and I like that. It makes the story feel more real to me.
Yeah, yeah. They're like, well, seems like this guy has all the weapons. He seems to be running a efficient city. The lights the lights are on. We have food. I guess I'll throw my hat in with this guy. Um, yeah, if since it was based off Lord of the Rings, if he's going to put a lot of biblical references into any book, since Lord of the Rings, of course, has so many biblical references, might as well put them all into this one book, right? So
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense. Um, I don't want to do any major spoilers for Fairy Tale, but to me, it was so weird how I just read The Stand and then I finished Fairy Tale, and um, so this is just like a minor plot point in Fairy Tale. It's not going to give anything away, but the main protagonist in Fairy Tale, um, now you tell me if you think this is like related to The Stand. So he basically goes to sleep and he has a dream, and then in the dream he's approached by wolves with red eyes, and then immediately it goes to the shot of the moon, right? And then there's these monarch butterflies flying past the moon, and he basically gets a message in one of his dreams from one of the good guys, how to basically get out of his situation. And I thought to myself, it's so weird how I just read The Stand and then went right into Fairy Tale, and I'm like, surely this is not coincidental. Like that has to be like, in my mind it was definitely related. And you think
Yeah, I mean,
about,
all that imagery just fits right in with the imagery from the stand, the wolves,
yeah,
the
yeah,
moon. Now, the butterflies, I can't think of any instance with butterflies, but they do carry
yeah,
a classical, like,
hmm,
translation or dream interpretation.
yeah, yeah. Um, so I'm curious to see if we do read Fairy Tale next, and what you guys think. But I mean, I'm thinking to myself that this has to be, there's no way like that's coincidental, right? I mean that
Oh,
seems to
no, it
tie.
absolutely seems purposefully done.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like to me, and I won't go into it, but I felt like there was several references to Randall Flagg as well. Just things where he basically draws your attention to something that's very odd and out of place, and you're like, well, why did he put that in there? And then you're like, oh wait, I think this is a reference to Randall Flagg, who of course appears in a ton of the books. So
And
I'm
also like the
yeah.
overarching concept of Stephen King's like multiverse, the books that
Hmm.
do fit in it, where you can see things where that multiverse fingerprint is present.
Yeah.
Randall Flagg and Mother Abigail both imply some type of purposeful movement of the universe
Hmm.
for the forces they represent,
Hmm.
good or evil or however you want to word them. So it's not that like Randall Flagg is necessarily like, we know he's not the mind behind whatever the bad is,
Hmm.
because he's too crazy. He like appears in random like places. He definitely has something else pushing him, manipulating him, moving him. Maybe he's just as much of a pawn of the force of evil as anybody else. He's just a repeated tool. Um, but I think that concept of the struggle of good and evil will be like, if we keep that in mind while reading through his works, I think we'll see the fingerprints of his multiverse
Hmm.
more than if we look specifically for Randall Flagg. Because like Wolves and Red Eyes, like yeah, that's Randall stuff, but that's also classic Stephen King evil stuff.
That's true.
And Randall's
That's
just like a
true.
part of the hierarchy of that. Um,
Yeah.
I definitely think if we keep those Stephen King concepts in mind that we've kind of picked out as we've read a little bit, I think we'll start seeing
Mhm.
them in even more things that don't directly reference his other works.
Yeah.
Because like in The Dark Tower, Randall Flagg is actually in it.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
no Randall Flagg necessarily. There's one part that like maybe he was there, but that
Mhm.
like that push of evil and good is definitely present throughout it.
Yeah. Um, and then I'm looking at the stand right now, and what's interesting is so uh it says so at the very beginning, so it's got the preface, the two-part preface where he's like, this is what you should read before you buy this, this is what you should read after you buy this. And then there's the epigraph, and then it actually says the circle opens. So that's interesting to me because in the stand it says the circle opens. Um, Now he revised the stand 3 times, so uh, he already got deeper and deeper into his expanded universe. So this might be something that he added later on because so it says Captain Trips, and before Captain Trips and before book one, it says the circle opens. And then at that end part where Randall Flagg is basically rejuvenated and comes back, so it says, yeah, chapter 78, and then it says Mayday, then it says Dusk of a summer evening, and then it says the circle closes. So that's how the book ends. So it says circle opens, circle closes, and I was like, that must, I guess, refer to like that cyclical nature of like Randall Flagg always coming back no matter what. You know, you basically can't permanently get rid of them. Similar to it as
I
well.
feel like that circle concept is also in it. It's been a while since I read it, but that was ringing
Hmm.
bells. I feel like maybe even one of the like chapter headings mentions it, where like the circle opening and circle closing, as if like the opening is the beginning of the confrontation and the closing is the end of the
Hmm.
confrontation and also the opening of the next one.
Yeah, yeah, because it never dies. You know, it he just or well, it or she just keeps
My God, it's
uh
female.
coming back over and over. So yeah, I'm really curious to dive more into his books, and I hope this is my hope. I hope we do Fairy Tale and then Dark Tower book one right after it because
I was thinking too.
I think you guys will get the most out of it. Um, if you do Fairy Tale and then Dark Tower right after it, because I know for a fact. So like I'm pretty sure there's references to Randall Flagg in there, but I know for a fact there's references to Dark Tower because there's like you start reading Fairy Tale and immediately you're like, oh wait a minute,
That's
what,
cool.
yeah, and then those books are just spaced so far apart. I mean, it's
Like in
wild
his
that he,
writing career,
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like the books are just spaced so far
40
apart.
years. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. And I kind of feel like when he made those very explicit references to the gunslinger, I feel like that adds even more, I guess, proof that Randall Flagg kind of plays a part in fairy tale as well. Because I was like, what's he trying to say here? Am I just seeing patterns that are not actually there? But I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm
So
really looking forward to us kind of sprinkling in the Dark Tower books as we read other Stephen King books.
yeah.
It's been 12 years, I think, or so since I've read it,
Hmm.
or since I finished it. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm really excited about going back with a the more mature mind and having read a little bit more.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, a lot of people are turned off by the first book. And apparently, people were saying like he wrote it in college when he was like 19 or 20, and then basically like put it on a shelf. So a lot of people were complaining about it, saying it was kind of rough around the edges. So it's probably not the best book to start off with, like that, making that like your first book, since that's, as far as I know, I guess that would be like the first book he ever wrote. If
Interesting.
uh,
That kind of makes sense because I feel
yeah.
like I know I followed that pattern when I was young and interested in fantasy, and I was coming up with like D&D
Mhm.
campaigns and ideas for books that I never wrote. Um,
Mhm.
that like I had this big epic involved, like that I was creating, and since then, over the years of playing D&D and stuff like that, like I use that as my own meta source material and build away from
Mhm.
it as if it's my
Mhm.
own like tower or my own like
Yeah.
center of my the fantasy concepts that I create in role playing games. Um, so to me, that sounds like a natural like part of a creative process. You get
Yeah.
really something into it, and then you think about that for the rest of your life because it's your
Mhm.
fantasy baby. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
he got the success and got to go back to it, and then weave it back into all of his other stories. So that's definitely like a thing to think about.
Yeah. Um, I also read that there was the original, Dark Tower book one book that he put out, but as he kind of added to his expanded universe, he actually had to go back and make revisions to that first book and basically clean stuff up and kind of add more clues and more connections to the rest of the expanded universe. Um, which is interesting. Not a lot of people do that, where they kind of like add on to their expanded universe organically and then kind of go back and then they're like, oh, let me
Yeah,
kind of fix this up.
and that makes me think of too when we were talking about the wolves that you noticed in Fairy Tale that the original cut of the stand before we read his latest bigger better uncut version, it probably didn't have the wolves in it like that because you didn't have the
Hmm.
kid originally, so there
Hmm.
was, I think there's a part later on where Randall Flagg does look through wolves and like I think
Hmm.
a character like hears them howling, or I think he looks at Tom Cullen, actually pursues Tom Cullen with wolves. um but without his being able to go back and revise it, that that concept, that creature of darkness, that he then uses as like symbolism, like in fairy tale, that wouldn't be there anymore. We wouldn't have that to connect. So it's really cool
Yeah.
that he does do that. um
Hmm. Yeah. I I think as we get deeper into the Dark Tower books, I think the whole like the circle opens, the circle closes. I think that's going to make a lot more sense as we kind of go through those. That's my impression. That's my feeling. All right. Did
what
you
did
have
you think of
any?
the
Oh,
ending? I don't think we've talked about
oh,
that
oh,
yet. The whole like traversal of stew. Yeah, like
yeah,
how'd you enjoy it?
yeah. It's like you were saying. It is really unusual to have the main bad guy blown to smithereens and then it keeps going. But it's like that was exciting in its own right because, Tom has to create that makeshift kind of sled for him, and then the sled falls apart, and then there's that fear of like how are they going to find a working vehicle, and so it's got to be stick shift, it's got to be at the top of the hill, and all these different factors have to fall into play, and then they find that one car that happens to fit the criteria where it's stick shift, it's at the top of the hill, they can kind of start rolling it and jump start it and get it working. And that right there was, I wouldn't say it was as exciting as the rest of the book because it was definitely like, the declining. I mean, at least for me, it felt like the action was definitely declining, but I thought it was still really exciting and still really interesting. Like I was still invested in it. Like, yeah,
Yeah, I
how
remember
are
the
they
suspense
gonna?
of reading that and
Yeah.
wondering. And also, like, you write Stu off because
Hmm.
like he falls and he sacrifices himself, and you're like, damn, ain't no way he's surviving that. All right, let's go
Yeah.
follow Glenn Bateman and the other two who are heading towards Las Vegas.
Hmm.
And then they, get destroyed in nuclear blast.
Hmm.
And then to come back and to have somebody to root for again, and then have that like slim chance of survival where if they don't get a
Yeah.
car here, they know they're freezing to death. Like,
Yeah. So yeah, it's like his leg is messed up, and he's still trying to drive a stick shift car, and there's still other cars in the middle of the road blocking them, and so yeah, it's I I didn't think that I was still gonna be invested in the story after like the big bad guy was blown up, but I was pleasantly surprised. I was like, yeah, this is still really interesting, like he did a good job of building suspense just with that concept of like, it's the apocalypse and everything's, busted and everything's, difficult. So yeah, I really liked how it ended. I thought it was great. I he gets a lot of now I'm talking about King. King gets a lot of flack from people saying that, oh, his endings are bad, he doesn't have good endings. He doesn't know how to write an ending, but I mean, I disagree. I think he does good endings actually. To me. So, yeah.
yeah, I used to like join in that rhetoric, like, oh yeah, doesn't do the best endings. And the more I think about it, the more I find his endings thoughtful, and that he's trying to show another aspect to whatever the horrors or thrilling part of the story was. Um, and I love the ending of The Stand. I mean, all those beautiful moments between Stu and Tom, and then the intensity of like, you've Stephen King, like he's fine with killing his characters. So like even though they're still going, like are we just waiting for him to die? Like are we
Yeah,
still gonna lose Stu? Like all those avalanches they walk past. Yeah, I remember.
right.
I remember expecting once it started. I remember expecting to not be interested, and then I mean, I think I read the last 250 pages of the book in one night, like
Hmm.
just because like
Hmm.
I was so invested. I so wanted to see how it was going to turn out for Tom and Stu. And I loved all the screen time, for lack of a better word, page time that
Yeah.
you get with Tom, because he's just such a delightful character.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, and then of course Nick Andros, his return. God, I
He
love
comes
Nick so
back.
much. I
Yeah.
love Nick. I remember I was really scared of that moment when Tom first left with Nick, because I was like, is this like some last ditch effort of Randall Flagg? And I feel like he wrote it with a little bit of like mystery of fear,
Mm.
kind of woven in. So you did wonder on those page turns. And then it ended up resolving into actually being Nick. And I was like, oh thank goodness.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, I didn't even think about it from that perspective, but yeah, like it could have been Randall Flagg disguising himself, like, it's evil Nick, you know? I
That's
didn't
what I
even
thought
think
it was
about
gonna
that.
be. I was so scared of Nick in those
Yeah,
few pages until like he really got into the conversation with Tom, and I was like, oh, good.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like don't let him do it to Tom. He's nothing but goodness.
Yeah, and it definitely seemed like Nick was in some sort of version of heaven, you know, kind of directing them from heaven, which was interesting because I don't remember that concept really being in other Stephen King books where like, you know, the good guy goes to heaven and then keeps helping other people,
Yeah,
you know?
and there
It
was
it
that like
yeah.
foreshadowing of it earlier. Though it was kind of maybe heavy-handed to call it foreshadowing, but can't remember who says it. Mother Abigail, right before she died,
Mm.
that like Nick's gone now, but he still has work to do.
Mm, mhm.
Um, and I remember reading that and being really excited, and then kind of forgetting about it. Um, and then when it like manifested the way it did with like Nick helping Tom get medicine for Stu, just being delighted. And still, that
Yeah.
wasn't the end of it. Like that was early
Yeah.
on in their process. That was to get rid of the infection from Stu's initial injury.
Mm.
And then they sang the first Noel, and I cried, and it was
Oh,
beautiful.
nice.
I
Nice. That's
text you
awesome.
about it if I remember correctly.
This is the best. Cool. All right. That's probably a good place to end it. I got a warning. It said you have 5 minutes left in your hour-long meeting. So,
Oh,
um, yeah. I try not to go too far over an hour because I feel like I've seen some of the other Stephen King podcasts and they're like, this is 3 hours long or this is 4 hours long. And I'm just like you gotta keep that to an hour. I don't
no.
yeah.
I get hungry in an hour, and I ate right before this, and it's about time for me to eat again. So.
Nice, nice. All right, cool. All right, see ya.
Bye, friend, and bye, listeners.
Bye listeners.
Slut out.
Slut out.